Amen. Thank you, choir. Well, this morning we're continuing our series that we're calling Testimony. And throughout this week, or throughout this series, we've had different members of our congregation who have come and shared part of their testimony. And so this morning we're privileged to have with us Matt Conrad. Matt grew up in this community, and he'll tell you some of his story. He went away to college and now is back and working at the high school as the athletic trainer. Is that correct? And so he's been spending time out in the rain this week, and so you may hear it in his voice. But anyway, we're glad to hear from Matt and how it is that God has worked in his life.
Check. Okay, thanks. So most of y'all, like Brian was saying, I grew up here in Monticello, grew up in this community, found Mumsy when I was in high school, but other than that, grew up in the church. And so a lot of you guys have probably seen bits and pieces of my story or even lived alongside it with me, which is really cool. What I'm excited to share today is kind of the timeline and kind of the blueprint, the foundation of my last 5 years, but kind of it all started way before that. And so when I first got married, so my wife and I, we've been married for about 3 years, just over 3 years now, I think, somewhere in there. And we've been married, and she, like, right after we got married, we just had some big life changes and kind of just like a hard season. I was finishing up my undergrad as a senior in college and really just didn't know, what was next. And I think that's typical for a lot of college seniors and just that season of life of change. And so didn't know what was next. And I remember praying to God. At that point, I was pretty involved with a lot of music stuff and touring and songwriting and connecting with other artists kind of across country and just some really cool opportunities. But didn't know what was next, didn't know how to interpret it, didn't know what it meant. And I remember, like, both of us in that season were really praying for, like, guidance and clarity and where, like, we're both had the heart space of, like, yeah, we'll say yes, but also I needed a lot of validation of, like, God, are you even here? And what he did for me in that season was really cool. And he kind of showed me this timeline that I'll show y'all. But essentially, he wasn't just answering, like, yes, I'm here now and I will be in the future, but he was like, I've been here since day one. So a big part of my story is music and is songwriting and is worship and what that looks like. And I didn't even know it for a really long time. And so when God revealed this timeline to me, what it did for me and my faith was allow me to enter with a heart of yes without having to say, like, I was able to take away the stipulation of, like, yeah, I'll follow you, but I need to know where it ends. And I don't know. Even now, like, I don't know what's next, and I don't know what music holds, and I don't know what, we have a new 4-month-old, almost 5-month baby. Like, I don't know what parenting holds, and I don't know what our family holds, and I don't know what the next steps look like. But this season, right after we first got married, when we were praying just for the guidance and clarity, God answered that question of, like, yes, I'm still here, I will be, but I always have been. And it took my ability to kind of the questioning out of, and it made it a little bit easier just to say, like, yes when opportunities happen. For me. So my story, and God used this, again, not as a way, actually the very first time point in my story was pretty irrelevant for about 15 years, because I didn't even remember it until he came back and through this season of prayer, like, reminded me that this is where he planted the seed. So my very first thing when I was 5 years old, when I was 5 years old is the first time I wrote and performed, like, my own first song. That's really small. But I was 5 years old. I wrote and performed my first song. And as a little kid, I kind of wrote music all the time. And it's just kind of part of, like, my bath time routine and part of my long car rides. It's how I got through them. But what's important about this time point is that the first song that I wrote and performed was a Christian song, and it was a worship song. And I don't really remember it, and I didn't remember it for like I said, about 15 years. But I remember this was the first example in my life of showing the evidence that he shows in Scripture of, like, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And I was not equipped as a 5-year-old to perform that song. I didn't know how to play an instrument. I didn't know like how like to have stage performance. I didn't know these things, but he connected me with the right people. We put some chords to it, and I remember I was able to perform that song. Like I said, it was pretty insignificant because I was 5 and I was just like, oh, this is cool. Didn't do much after that. And then we fast forward to when I'm 9. So me growing up, I was a sports kid pretty much first. I was just an active kid, and a lot of activity was sports. So I was a sports kid. My 3 things, as I kind of grew up, the 3 things I always kept in my life were sports, music, and like academics, like what I wanted to study or have a career in. And like that was my high school brain, like figuring out life. And those were like the 3 doors. And I prayed, like, God, how do I keep all these open? But for a really long time, music wasn't my own choice. God just kept it in there. And so when I was 9, the library had programming for piano lessons and vocal lessons. And I don't know if I said I wanted to do it or if my parents were like, hey, like this is a really cool opportunity and it takes 2 hours of your day. You should go do it. I don't know how it panned out, but I said yes to it. And we went and did piano lessons. And this was another moment where God really showed, like he showed up that summer for me because by no means am I like a piano prodigy or like really great at piano. But for whatever reason that summer, it just clicked and it made a lot of sense to me. And I remember that summer, we were like our plan, like through that program, I think it was a 6-week program, was to go through one book, like one piano book. And I remember coming in my second week and like telling all the teachers, like I already finished the book, and they didn't really believe me. And so they were like, show me. And I like went and played every song through it. And like that, again, that's not because I was just this great musician. It was because God was, and I look back on it, God just really showed up and he was like, I'm going to show you the gifting, but I'm also going to get you interested in it. But I'm also like keeping this in your life. And so I ended up going through, I think I did a book a week, that program, maybe a book every other week, but I was like just flying through books, really took to piano. And this was my first experience with music. And that resulted, why that was a significant time point in my timeline was that resulted in me taking piano lessons, which was never on my like radar, never something that I really thought I would do or what I was into, because I was a basketball kid and pretty much anything with a ball, I played it. And so I created time, carved time, started piano lessons, and I did that for 4 years. And so again, we see God kind of intervening. Now, the other part of that story is we did voice lessons. And this is a point I'll come back to if I have some time, but we did voice lessons and I hated it. We got through one voice lessons and I came out of that. I'm pretty sure I was just really hungry, but I threw a tantrum, told my parents I'm never going back to voice lessons. Singing is stupid. Didn't like it. And that was a point where, I kept that mentality for probably 10 years. I lost that kind of battle of my gifting. I look back on it now and really see the enemy working, and because the song that set me off through all voices, we sing all the little kid songs and the warm-ups and all the things, but the song that set me off specifically was This Little Light of Mine. And so what happened through that season was I got really mad at, I started thinking Jesus was stupid. I started thinking that the church was stupid. I started thinking that worship was stupid because I was hungry, and that was just a song that I was weak in as a 9-year-old and hated it. And so it took me a long time to figure out how to sing again and love singing and fall back in love with it. But it's really interesting because even at a really young age, we see kind of just the battle there. So then we fast forward. So I'm going into middle school. About 13 and 14, I keep doing piano lessons, but then my 6th grade year, basketball started picking up a little bit more, and there just wasn't availability. And so I decided, I did art as a 6th grader, and God bless my art teacher. I was not good at it. She was very kind. I was terrible. And so I'm sitting there thinking, I can't do art again, and I'm not going to do choir because singing is stupid. I don't have any options. I don't know what I'm going to do for my extracurriculars. And at this point, I had to walk away from piano lessons because I just didn't have the time and really the bandwidth to do it. And God goes, I got great people in my life, put the right solutions, and they opened, for my 7th and 8th grade year, they opened a piano class that was below my skill level. I had already learned all the things, but it kept me on a keyboard. So I learned, they did this piano class. It was an easy A. I made some really good friends. And God, he's tricky. He works in this way. He goes, so I did it for my 7th grade year. It was great. We move on. I do my 8th grade year, staying on a keyboard, doing all this stuff. And my 8th grade teacher was so for extra credit, you can try out for choir for high school. Because in high school, you have to do at least 1 year of one of the things, choir, band, or art. and I couldn't do band because I didn't start it as a sixth grader and just all this stuff. And so I was like, well, I don't need extra credit. I haven't missed a point this whole semester, and so I'll be okay. And then all of my friends did it because they all wanted to be in choir anyway. And so then my teacher was like, hey, like, unfortunately, you don't really have a choice. Like, you just need to go down there and, like, audition. If you don't do choir, it doesn't matter, but, like, this is just what we're doing today. And I didn't want to, and I knew the choir teacher, that she knew my sister and, like, my family and everything, and I was like, I don't want to do it. And then ended up, through that audition, got into, like, our varsity choir in high school. So in that 13 and 14 years, what God's doing is, like, still intentionally keeping music, and a little bit not my choice, but also it wasn't like forcefully. It was just like, yeah, like, I convinced myself every step along the way, like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Oh yeah, I'll do this. It was just logical. I had to take a class, and I wasn't going to do art. I had to audition for choir, and, you know, I knew I needed it for 1 year. So that audition turned into two things. One, me thinking I could sing and I couldn't yet. And two, me deciding, oh, like, I'll do it for 1 year, easy A, get it done. And that 1 year turned into 4 years because I ended up not hating it. But along the way, about this same time, God's working in my life, and he... like, I have friends, I have all the things, and I get this really great idea as a 15-year-old. There's this really cute girl, and I was like, I'm going to ask her out, and I'm going to write her a song, and I'm going to sing it. But I realized, like, it's really hard to take a piano with you everywhere you go. That doesn't really work. And so I was like, well, like, what's the answer? And on a completely, like, super out of the blue, it's just... I get really excited because it's cool to see God working and just the people around you too. But out of the blue, like, I get a guitar for Christmas that I didn't really ask for. I think I asked for a PlayStation, but I got a guitar. And I'm just like, okay. And I'm convinced, because I had a timeline. I had this song that was mediocre and a voice that I could not sing because I just didn't do it for so long. But I'm convinced, like, God convinced me to get back into singing and songwriting. And so this was the very first song that I got back into writing, was to ask this girl out, because if you ask my sister, she said I'll never stop talking about her, but I don't know. That doesn't sound like me. I'm not much of a talker. I'm just kidding. But so I write this song, and I'm going to sing it to her, and we have this whole plan. And I get this guitar for Christmas. I'm convinced that I can learn it in 6 days. And almost did, but, like, my fingers hurt really bad, and it wasn't good enough to be like, I can do it. And so I, like, spent 5 days grinding out this, like, guitar, trying to figure it out, kind of put it up, and ended up singing a cappella. It was a mess, but it worked, and she said yes, and now we have a 4-month-old baby. So it worked out, but God's still working in my life in that way, outside of just music opportunities. But he's like, hey, this is part of who you are and who you're created to be, and also this person is a part of your story as well, and so we're going to kind of put them together. So then we fast forward, what's the next, 17? Oh, so this is where I get plugged in. So around that 15-year-old too, Erin Ellis, who worked at the church, she kind of caught me off guard. So around that time, I'm getting plugged into church here, and, like, doing youth group and playing basketball and all this stuff. And Erin catches me one day at church camp, and essentially was like, hey, like, I heard you play piano. And I was like, I can. And she was like, cool, I'll see you next week. And I was like, no. But she was like, no, like, you're already scheduled. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Like, I don't. And she was like, oh, it's okay, you'll be fine. It's really easy. And so I get plugged in, and I, like, again, didn't really say no, and get plugged in. And that started about a 6 to 7 year stretch where I was on stage serving in a worship position for pretty much every Sunday, like maybe 2 Sundays a year. I, like, just wasn't on stage. But that introduced me into worship. And so when I was 17, it was my senior year, last year at camp, and they do this talent show kind of thing. And I decided that, like, this was my first rewriting of a Christian song, of a worship song, with the heart behind, like, God and what that meant. And the theme that year was being anchored in Christ and what that looks like. And so I wrote my first song, and, like, started it on Tuesday, finished it on Wednesday, decided to perform it on Thursday, and felt really good about it. But I remember, like, I played it, I was kind of nervous, but I was like, no, like, I think this is, like, kind of where, like, God's calling me into, and I just wanted to see where it goes. Because I was not about, like, if you saw me in high school, like, I was not about, like, doing anything musical in front of anybody else, because I wasn't great at it, and I just, like, they didn't really, like, people didn't know that was a part of, like, my skill set and who I was. And so I sing this song, and I remember, like, a very specific moment where in that song, when I'm singing it, when I get to the bridge, and I just feel this overwhelming like pressure, like just weight, like I'm crushing underneath, like it felt like I never fell, but I remember being so overwhelmed by like the Spirit, because what I did in that performance was I wrote down the bridge I wrote down the lyrics to the bridge and gave them to kids, because my heart going into it was like, my talent is worship. Like, my talent isn't singing or songwriting or whatever. My talent is worship, and I wanted my friends and the people at camp to worship with me to this song. And I wrote it down, and they all sang it, and it was it was just one of those moments that I cling to whenever I'm really like, God, like, remind me your presence, remind me what you feel like and everything. And I just remember being so just crushed under it. And that followed up, that was a really hard season too, because we had just come off of like losing in state and just a hard season of life. And so I was really confused and emotional and all the things, but I just remember that was a very clear, like, I'm going to pursue music. I'm going to start seeing where this can go and whatever. And then I felt really good about it. Other acts went on, and then we turned around and I lost the competition, and I was upset because I'm really competitive. And I was like, this is dumb. I was like, that was killer. Like, everybody was singing and that was really good. And then we find out later, they didn't realize I wrote it. They thought it was already another song because everybody else was singing it, but I was really competitive. And so then I didn't know how to take it, because I was like, God, if you wanted me to be a songwriter, you would have let me win this competition. I don't get it. I don't understand how this is working. And so just the back and forth. So that's kind of the blueprint. That's the foundation. But when I was a couple years ago, so since then, what's that one? Oh, so following that season, I had an opportunity to get connected with a group called the Academy of Dreamers, and that y'all were a really big part of that, where I help kids do a sponsorship program and help kids get sponsored, we use Child Fund International, but similar to Compassion. And as a result, I got free recording opportunities down in Nashville, and was able to go on a Christmas tour, which we hosted one of the sites, and make really cool connections in the industry. But I remember that event occurred in a season where I had just given up basketball. So I went to play college basketball and hated it. It was awful. My first school I went to, culture was terrible. My teammates it wasn't what I was about. My teammates were good people, but it just wasn't what I was about. So I transferred, and kind of the same thing happened, where I had really good teammates, but not maybe the best coaching staff, as far as things that were told to me, things that were promised, and then I'd show up, and then we lost a lot, and I hated it. And so I was like, I can't, what do I do? We took a trip to Argentina, and after that trip, we weren't allowed to have our phones or anything, so I spent my 10 days in Argentina, doing all these camps that were teaching kids and playing some of their semi-pro teams, and then really just trying to figure out what's this mean. And I come home from that trip, and I was like, I think that I'm just I'm done. And within 24 hours of me shutting the door on basketball and telling my coaches and telling my teammates hey, thanks for everything, but I'm in a season I need to walk away. I got invited to the Academy of Dreamers. I auditioned, I got accepted, we cranked it through. I finished, did recordings at the end of that summer, and went on a tour in that next Christmas. And that was, again, for me, God showing there's maybe it's a career, but maybe it's just this season, but there's opportunity to do some really cool stuff and share your songs. So that is the timeline of my blueprint, of my foundation, of my testimony. And since that time, since I was 19, I'm 25 now. So over the past 6 years, I finished college. My wife and I got married. We have a baby, and I've really just been writing a lot and trying to see what goes from there. But what I learned, the three biggest kind of takeaways, what God showed me through this story was, one, He never asked me to change who I was or who He created me to be, but He asked me to grow into who He created me to be. And what I mean by that, I don't love the word change, because it almost implies a brokenness, which we are human and we are broken, but God also made everybody, myself included, very specifically. So my example for this is He didn't ask me not to be competitive. He just, along the ways, asked me to redirect my competitiveness. He's asked me to, in seasons where you are competitive, are you able to still love the competition? Are you able to love me more than the competition? He's never asked me not to be passionate. He's just asked me to guide my passion into him and to worship and to the church and to serving and to those kind of things. The second big takeaway through my testimony that God's kind of revealed to me is that he's never not been there. And this was a thing I struggled with for a long time, because when you go into seasons where it's hard, you're like, okay, well, like, God, are you even here? Do you exist? What I find myself doing a lot is like, is this just a fluke? Like, is it like, how did I get here? And that's why this timeline has been really important to me, because it shows just like evidence of like, it's not like, it's all very intentional, not necessarily planned, I don't know, but all intentional, and it just required me to say yes along the way, and then it spells out this really neat story. But it's never that he's not there, it's just my ability to be aware, my awareness of his presence. And so, when I was little, I put a lot of that to, like, I just was little and didn't have the eyes to see. When I got older, about that high school, college age, it was more of like I just didn't put my glasses on to see. I entered seasons where I just didn't specifically look for the presence of God. I didn't look for him showing up, and so I just didn't see it. But it wasn't that he was never there. He was never forceful in his presence, but he was always present. I just had to become aware of it. And the last thing, and I touched on it earlier, even at my 9-year-old point, was that in the same space that God is working in our lives, in my life, the enemy is just waiting to kind of piggyback off of it. Because one of the things that I've learned is that the enemy has no power to like get between us and God, but the only play he has is to get us to turn ourselves on God. And so my 9-year-old story, that's like why that point in my life seems so significant to me, is because I walked out, I liked piano, it was cool. The song, like, I went into voice lessons, and I convinced myself that I couldn't sing, that I hated singing, and it was a Christian song, like it was a churchy song that set me off. We did all the other stuff, and I didn't care, but that's very specific. He caught me in a moment where I probably was hungry, probably was tired, didn't have like the armor to put on. Yeah, I just wasn't equipped yet. But for about 10 years of my life, was convinced that like, this area of my story I just can't do. And God was very patient. He worked over those 10 years, and he was like, well, he went to 15-year-old Matt and was like, well, I know you're kind of girl crazy, so this is the answer. Like, I'll get you singing by introducing a girl. And it worked. And we've been, that's kind of the story, but he never was just like, sat me down and was like, you have to sing. He let me figure it out. But it was a part of my story that sometimes I look back, I'm like, I wish I had those 10 years where I was just pouring into singing and what God had for me at that time. But yeah, those are my big 3 things of that I've like learned that I hope you can take away. And yeah, that's kind of it.